WTPN We the People Network. I'm Doug Malo here with my co-host Ed Dolezal. As you all know, we started this channel to educate men and women on common law and the proper remedy to restore a Republican form of government. Today, we are excited to have on Cory Endrulat. Cory is an author, organizer, nutritional health coach, and a whole lot more. Cory, welcome to WTPN today. Appreciate you coming on, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me on.
Hey, welcome, Cory. We're excited to chat with you. So you're located in Florida too, but on the West Coast, is that it?
That's correct, around the Tampa area. So
Oh, yeah.
anybody who wants to come on down, they're welcome to come on down. We're growing food. We're doing a lot of amazing projects locally. I'm working with local businesses. We're doing a local newspaper, but we also invite people for their worldwide efforts. And if it inspires you, great, because I'm showing you what's possible. I came down here not even 2 years ago from Pennsylvania, and immediately I started doing events out the door at local businesses because I was networking with over 20 different groups and organizations. So anybody out there can do the same thing. If you think you're alone, you're never alone. Something I like to tell everybody every time.
So basically, what you're saying is you created a cooperative community where products and services and mutual support is being provided to one another with people of like mind, correct?
Yeah, yeah. The local businesses I partner with, they let me do events there, and they also network for me, right? To for those events, it helps them, helps me, it helps everybody. So, I do something like that, and then I invite other groups, such as whether it's Republican or flat Earth groups, or whatever it is, as long as they're freedom oriented, I bring them all together. That's what my role is as an aggregator. I'm like the marketer organizer guy, right? And I know there's a lot of people who are way more skilled than me in many different fields and areas, but by bringing them together, I see all these conversations and things happen. I'm like, whoa, right? This is what we need to create freedom. Some people will call it like a parallel system or a parallel economy. So that's what's happening. And yes, there are people who are also building like neighborhoods, and they're going a step further, right? I want mass whole of the people in this world, right? So I'm not trying to go off grid and set up my own little like community. I'm trying to find what is the domino that's going to lead to a mass shift in adoption of permaculture and voluntarism and ideas we aren't taught about in school.
So what is the demographic that you seem to be hitting the most? And the reason I'm asking is because we have found in our endeavors that it's been usually more at the senior level
Hmm.
and at the school age, high school, younger parents. That seems to be an issue, and I'm
Yes.
curious to find out whether you've been able to provide some stimulus in that area, and if so, how did you do it?
That's a very good question, and it's very important to me as well. I would say most of the people that come to my events are 50 and older, or not not that young. Even though I might be one of the youngest in the
Well, watch
network.
what you say now. I'm 75, dude.
Well, listen, it's just a number, but the point is that we do a lot of people say share this concern, and I share that concern because I care about this generation and what's going on. And they're going to raise kids that lead to the next generation, and it's there's a lot of shifting happening. There's a lot of disconnect happening. I ask these individuals, I'm like, where are your kids, right? And so they have children, but where are they? And they sometimes have a hard time talking with their family. So, if anything, some of my events act as trauma support or therapy for conspiracy theorists. I sometimes say, using the word conspiracy theorists, these are just a label that is thrown on the people who question things. But even their
You mean
family
a
members.
tinfoil hat?
But yeah, but even their family members will say, "Oh, well, I don't want to talk about that. We shouldn't talk about that. They push that aside." There's always a limit that somebody has if they're not truly free in their own mind. Like I'm willing to talk about anybody, anything. That's why I'm willing to talk to anybody and network with other people because I see the humanity inside of them, right? So I don't have that limitation there. So I am open to talking to the youth, but I have to approach them from where they are at. And I think that is something that all of us have to learn to do, whether we're talking to somebody older or younger. It's like we have to understand where people are at, why they're frustrated with the world, or why they don't going on in the world, right? Maybe we say,
Interesting.
oh, the younger generation is too distracted. They're on their phone. Well, why is that? Maybe they know that. Maybe they don't feel like there's a way to escape it. Maybe they don't have a strong support system. There's a lot of factors in there. And so the way I plan on actually getting involved with them is through the colleges right now, because there's public colleges that you can just go to and you can start doing events there. So that's what I'm doing, actually. I've organized a bunch of people who are college age. Some I've met outside the college, some I've met in the college, to simply bring together and learn from them. And by bringing that community together and opening that space for the conversation, I believe everything else will fall into place on its own,
Yeah.
frankly.
The other
If
thing
I
that
can,
comes to mind,
okay.
sorry, was that you, Doug?
It was me. Yeah, I was just, if you don't mind, I was just comment about the youth. I don't know if it's indicative of the college age kids, but the younger adults, they seem to be disconnected. The disconnect I find is that they just feel like that nothing affects them. If nothing going on affects them in their world, and there's a disconnect because obviously we know everything affects them and their future and their world. But
Right.
I get that a lot. Do you find that as well?
Yeah. And I think partly it's interesting because you think that with social media and with technology, we'd be more connected, not less, as a civilization. But it seems to have the opposite effect. Social
Right.
media is creating an anti-social world.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing is that we've reached the climax of this to where it is starting to backfire on people's health and their relationships that they're starting to notice this themselves. But they're so awkward, and myself included, over the years, I've had to realize that myself. It's like I am addicted to this thing, or I'm scrolling on social media, and what am I doing? Like there's that moment of realization that we all have, and what do we do? It's like most people, I would say, just feel helpless and they feel like there's nothing they can do. So that's why for me to bring on campus this idea of inspiration and empowerment to say, hey, we're together, we may be facing these different things together, it helps a lot. Not that we would sit in a victimhood mentality. That's not what I want to do, but the exact opposite of like recognizing where we do get stuck and recognizing where we do play the victim and saying, no, we can be much more than that. We don't have to fall to these ideologies, these labels, these identities, or this status or that. We can simply stand on our freedom. Like it's just not just physical, but also mental, right?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
spiritual process,
I,
ultimately.
the thought that occurs to me, and it's an old one, but um, one of the ways you can tap into the younger generation, both parents and children, is through the education. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the government is responsible for educating the children.
Hmm.
And everything that we've seen, for example, in Hawaii right now, we were on a call last night, and Governor Josh Green, who happens to be a doctor, by the way, is mandating vaccinations for children to return to school, which is absolutely not only nonsensical, but it's murder. And so we put together some suggestions for our colleagues out there to how to address it.
Hmm.
And hopefully that'll sort itself out. And they're going to copy and jag so that and also filed for a criminal complaint of AO 91. So
Yeah.
the point that I'm getting at is that education is a really good entree, in my opinion. I've
Hmm.
seen it happen because my eldest daughter, has twins, and they were going to a Catholic school which did not respond to the concerns of the parents. So my daughter said, I'm out of here. F off. Taking my kids out. But there's still a lot of people that are stuck in that system. And now that the Department of Education is being abolished, they're going to be compelled to do something. And that something means they're going to have to organize, think about either homeschooling or a hybrid, et cetera. And this is where we, as constitutionalists and common law people, can help them
Sure.
establish or come up with some ideas working together. And in Florida, we seem to be fortunate in that or is it the federal government? I think it was the federal government's going to be giving $10,000 per student for the year. So there is going to be some monetization, which will allow parents to organize themselves and hire teachers who are on the same wavelength, if you will, and educate either in a community or a hybrid or whatever. So I think that's a good way to go. And obviously the test scores are proven to be terrible or with no improvement. And of
Right.
course, the expenditures keep going up and more staff added, and pension obligations are going up. It's all bullshit. So I think that's a good venue. Doug, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, just Cory, you said before it was very important. You said there's a community, right? That community is so important
Yep.
to go to college campuses and say, hey, you're not alone. Let's form
Right.
community. Well, what we do here at WTPN is we promote assembly, which is the same exact thing that our founding fathers put in place to come together in community and assemble in our common law assemblies on our local level in our counties. And so it's interesting. I just want to point that out, that what you are saying parallels exactly to why we promote the assembly.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, frankly, I think it's just a human desire. Everybody wants some sense of community. And even if that means independence and being with nature, you know, you're not alone. You're never alone in this world. You have some shared connectiveness. The only thing that disconnects us from that is technology and these illusions of reality. Those
Right.
are not real things. So when you're connected with nature, you're not alone just as much as when you're with other people. And you can get a lot of great ideas out of other people, but also being alone. There's benefits to both, right? But people have this natural drive to nature, and this is a very good, you know, drive and hook for this generation and for any generation, I would say, because people, like I said, inside of them, they want some of these things psychologically. And there's a lot of projecting that goes on. There's a lot of attachment that goes on, desires that if you start to unwrap that psychologically, you start to really connect with an individual and understand the bigger picture, which is beyond politics, beyond culture, beyond everything that people think that they know about themselves or their reality. And when you reach that point, then anybody is open to anything within that reality, including the politics and the culture. But it's like getting to the root cause, which, you know, in medicine, this is something I want to do. So when I'm doing it on the mental level, it's about like what traumas are holding people back, what fears are holding them back. And you don't know what these kids might have gone through. A lot of kids don't grow up with strong families. And that's concerning to me. I see in the average car, I see people driving in America. I only see one person in the car, and there's four seats. You know, it's small little things that if you don't pick up on, it's like they make a big difference. People have artificial lawns. They're not growing food. Very basic. We used to all have farms. We used to all grow things or at least know how to do some basic survival skills. But we're not taught about that in school. So simply by bringing awareness to nature, especially as AI increases, it's going to, I believe, help a lot of people. But they're going to find out that they need it. And that might come through hardship. That might come through experience. But that's okay. That means that, you know, we are here, sort of like we're ready for you. When you're ready to come, we're here, right? With this information, with knowledge that is alternative. So
Yeah.
it's important to be there, be supportive, ask questions, and don't be like, you're wrong, you have to believe what I say, because then that's going to draw people away.
Well, the other thing is the community esprit that you're talking about is something that is going to make people feel very comfortable because everybody's vibrating at a certain frequency,
Yep.
which draws them together. And there's obviously a lot of studies that have been done that way. The most famous book is Power versus Force, where there's a grid. I think it's page 86 or something like that. And it shows you the spectrum. So people will be drawn to people of like mind that want to achieve the same thing. And the corollary is also true. If you don't vibrate at that frequency, there's no congruence. The people that are not in that same mindset
Hmm.
are not going to be attracted and will not congregate with them. So there's a natural selection that takes place, and that's what we see a lot going on right now. Whether if you go to Walmart or even to Publix, I don't want to be here, type of thing. It's kind of
Hmm.
funny.
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. You start to
When,
just naturally start to think about what's in your food and what's over here, what's over there. Questions you never asked before. Once you start asking some of those core questions, like how many people, I've interviewed over 40 people on the subject natural law, which Mark Passio teaches, right? It's like a 9-hour seminar. All these people watched that seminar, and some of them were like ex-cops. They were all sorts of different positions in society. Some of them, they didn't realize that they had an ego all of their life. They didn't realize they had all these problems, or that that they were being deceived to. But when they watched that seminar, because it got to the root cause, the morality, the trauma, the fear, the psychological elements, everything. I mean, it was like, boom, I'm willing to question religion, politics, culture. I'm out of it, and that is a very freeing effect. But I think what happens with a lot of freedom communities is there might be an emphasis on one aspect or another, but not true freedom. I'm trying to get people to true freedom, but that is a transition process in many ways to get to that point. So it is a very tricky balance. You mentioned power versus force. I think you're quoting Hawkins, if I'm correct.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
work.
yeah.
Yeah. And I have him actually as a reference in Health Revealed, a seminar that I have, which is like over 24 hours with medical professionals detailing statism, the mindset that I particularly address on my channel. And I think it is very relevant, but it's like an interesting polarity because you don't want to say, "Oh, I'm only going to associate with these people, and I don't want to associate with these people," right? There has to be a bridge between the alternative and the mainstream. We don't want to get stuck in our echo chambers. So it's a tricky balance, but that's again why I have to emphasize being present and asking questions, the
Well,
Socratic method.
the other thing is, quite honestly, you can talk yourself till you're, blue in the face, but what people follow and what convinces people is your actions. So, yeah, plant the seed, but ultimately,
Hmm.
you have to walk the talk.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to convince people ultimately that, oh, maybe there's something here. And the other
Hmm.
thing I wanted to mention, the exterior is a reflection of the interior.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of people that have no interior, no soul. The non performing characters, there's a whole bunch of them out there. It's a majority. So
Hmm.
the minority of us have begun or have seen that nuance, which is huge.
Yes.
So,
Yes, we
we,
can't lose faith in someone. Like, so when we say, they are NPCs, that's where I have to say, I agree with you and your perspective on that, but I have to say I still believe somewhere inside of them there is a conscience or a soul that can perceive their reality. Because if I do not believe in that and do not give faith to that, then they will never heal.
right.
People heal out of cancer from simply believing it and so much. Belief systems can drive the world to its madness, to its end, to its chaos, or to its to its greatest feats. And so, what we have to be careful. Where do we put our mind? And maybe we need to get out of our mind even more.
Well, the other thing is, for now, as I see it, there is a split that's taking place. You have those that are aware and spiritually and energetically able to make that take that path and make that transition, and you have others that may lag and may follow or not, but that's their choice. It's free will.
Hmm.
And I don't necessarily feel that I have to go out of my way to make a special mission to try and rescue people who are going to resist.
Hmm.
I'm
Right.
just going to go in my direction, support the community that I'm a part of or are attracted to me to do
Hmm.
what needs to be done.
Right.
And it's we have different dimensions that are happening in the now all the time.
Yeah.
And it just depends energetically where you happen to be. One day you're a little bit lower, a little bit higher, but ultimately, could we get everybody there? It would be ideal, but it ain't going to happen, I believe, today. Tomorrow, perhaps. But for now,
Hmm.
I'm just concerned about following that path, which is a solitary path,
Hmm.
and to support those that are willing to come alongside and follow which is different from my ambitions, right?
Mm.
So the old saying about lead, follow, or get out of the way, very applicable in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yep.
Corey,
I like that.
you give me the impression that you're speaking about, farming, for lack of a better word, regenerative, possibly, um,
Sure.
exposing this importance to healing nature and how that reacts to common law, natural law, really, and who we are and our rights and our sovereignty. At the same time, I also hear coming out of you that you have a passion and a heart for inner healing, on a sense, right?
Yes.
For lack of a better word, and really what you're really talking about, I believe, is an expanding consciousness for
Hmm.
some of these people. And both you and I were talking, you and Ed were talking back and forth about this and the challenge these non-performing characters. The problem really is that the way I see it is that many people are limited because of the boxes that they draw. Ironically, we have boxes around us on this camera, but everything is a square that we live in, and we really should be living in a circle, and you know that. So, but the problem is we put ourselves into these boxes, or the people do, whether they're
Hmm.
awake or they're not. A religious box, a political box, and when we're living inside of that box, it's near impossible to be open to all possibilities, to
Right.
expand our consciousness the way we need to get any kind of reality check on really what is going on here, who we are as individuals, as men and women, and as we are on the sovereign land. And so I didn't want to pontificate too much, but I just wanted to get a feeling. Is that where you're at more? Because it seems like that's a big bucket. And I was almost trying to put you in a little bucket, being the same thing I'm trying not to say that we should do.
It's
I
such a
thought it was
beautiful
all about
thing.
farming, but it's a beautiful thing what you're doing. It's interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that and make it clear in our minds from you?
Sure. It's a beautiful thing. Yes, the goal is mass consciousness, a mass shift in awareness beyond just America, by the way. All the countries of the world need to be free. It is not, I care about the people in China, the people who are in North Korea, who are only stuck in seeing this one worldview and perception from the media because they don't have access to other information. I care about those people. And so I'm not saying that we need to, sacrifice ourselves, give away our resources like some people will then claim. And again, they usually do it out of some sort of virtue, like, oh, look, I'm helping people. I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying everybody's got to work on themselves. Stop pointing the finger, looking external for the solutions all the time. And the boxes are often coming from these external forces. And sometimes oftentimes it's very unconscious in our upbringing. It's like we're exposed to this idea. Okay, well, I'm going to go along with this idea. It can be as simple as the idea of a republic or a constitution or America and its flags and its banners, when some of these concepts have been borrowed from times before, but we wouldn't have known because we didn't live before. And then you start studying history and you're like, wait, we start to see history is just cycling itself over and over again. The only thing that's actually shifting history is people like the abolitionists, religious figures that like sacrificed themselves and created a mass shift in awareness. What's needed is another shift in awareness, which is why a lot of people are being drawn to spirituality again, but they see the problems with religion. So it's all about navigating nuance. And that's what's going to help us reach the bigger picture. When I see light and dark, I see, oh, well, you can't have light without dark. When I see male and female, I say, oh, well, you can't have, one without the other. And you see these principles all throughout the universe. And people like to twist these and they like to make it all confusing so that way you don't understand these different opposites. Um, when you start to see that right there to me is the expansion of consciousness. So you have to seek out and understand the enemy that you're fighting, right? Otherwise, what are you fighting? How are you going to defeat the enemy? So we have to invite the enemy. We have to be courageous to be in the front line, just like he said, confront and lead. I love that whole list he had, because we have to incorporate all those elements. It's not one element that's like we have to really nail down on. It's how do we incorporate all of that? So again, presence to me is the key because nature kind of is telling us what to do. through the effects of our actions. If we have a disease, it's because we did something for a long time that accumulated. And then we have to go back and say, well, what caused this disease in the first place? And then what continued it? And then we can say, well, let's treat it, but then why don't we look at the prevention of it? So that forces us to go back. But if we stay stuck on the treatment, we're only doing symptom management. And so that's another box. That's another limitation. So you find out how beautiful it is because it heals people. It gets to the root cause. It says, I don't need to get sick anymore. It says, I don't need to deal with tyranny anymore. I don't need to have war anymore. I don't need to have confusion anymore. And that right there is big, right? Because many people will say, oh, well, war will always exist. Oh, this will always be. They trap themselves by that mere admittance. They say, oh, well, we can't convince a billion people that they are free or that, they deserve freedom and that they can be responsible over themselves. Well, then we'll never have it. We need to inspire in people the idea that it is truly possible to be free. Because
Yeah.
the abolitionists could have gave up and said to the slaves, oh, well, you're slaves, you don't know how to read or write. We're not going to bother teaching you because that's just your condition. And many scientists were proving the fact that these people were inferior and could never read and write. The
Yeah,
abolitionists said, no, they can totally do it. We just have to inspire it within them. And then they brought in religion as a guiding tool for that. And then the churches fought them. Because they were actually practicing religion and the churches were practicing a cult doctrine trying to tell people what to do with their own lives. So they were navigating nuance in order to expand consciousness. And what did they do? They ended slavery, chattel slavery, one form after thousands of years. But that's a pretty big step in the right direction. Only recently have we acknowledged that other races and other cultures can be equal to us. Thank you to America and the founding fathers and to the abolitionists for that step in the right direction. But that doesn't mean that we should end right there.
Yeah.
We have to learn from them and recognize there is a further action steps to do, which is why I talk about the abolitionists. I think there's a lot of emphasis on the founding fathers, not so much on the abolitionists that I want to see, because they lived in a very similar time era and saw the problems with them, but also saw the good things with them, and were able to say, okay, well, how can we move forward?
I hear what you're saying, and I think unfortunately we have to go a little bit deeper.
Sure.
The abolition was never complete. We
No.
are still slaves today
Yeah.
of the Federal Reserve, the IRS, and a very, very tricky, very sly bunch of fraudsters that have been around for centuries. And fortunately, we're addressing it at the highest level, and it's going to be cleared up. So ultimately, and I've traveled a lot to a lot of 30 different countries, worked there, etc. People are all the same. They all have the same ambitions. Their cultures are very unique. I happen to be a practitioner of long date of Qigong and Tai Chi. And I'm a great supporter of traditional medicine, which is, everything from naturopathic doctors like Peter Glidden and others, and traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, etc. And they've been around a lot longer than, the Rockefeller bullshit that was pill pushing pharma. So all of that stuff is going away. And the beauty of it is that everything that has been hidden and kept from us, everything from as simple as hydrogen power for vehicles, anti-gravity vehicles, a recognition that our DNA strands can be expanded to the 12 strands that it should be, our ability to generate healing skills that we have, just like Jesus said in the Bible or the so-called Bible. All of that is coming now. Some of us, are blessed to have done some of that. I personally, as a Qigong practitioner, do healing work as well. But it's not me that's healing it. I'm just channeling the energy from the ascended masters. And it's the client, if you will, who does the hard work if they're willing to do that. But people are not conditioned to comprehend and follow through. That if you want to see a change within yourself, you have to change. and it becomes part of your daily routine, just like you're brushing your teeth,
Right.
right? It's not something one and done. So all of these things are possible. All these things are available to us. I mean, think about the copper rods that you put in the field
Right.
and how it really multiplies the yields in the
Electroculture.
oh my goodness gracious.
Yep.
There's so much out there. So,
Yes.
it's all been
We
hidden
did a
from
whole
us.
show on electroculture, by the way. If people want to go back and look, we did a whole show on them. Sorry, Ed, go ahead.
Yeah. So, so much has been hidden from us because they wanted to keep us enslaved, and the abolition was never complete. But
Right.
now we're doing that. Now
Yes.
we're helping to free people up. It goes beyond skin color. It goes beyond religion. It
Hmm.
goes beyond finance.
Yep.
Right? We're not debtors. We are creditors. It says to KV Trust, all that shit. So basically, um, there was a saying I remember in the Bible. I can't get it exactly right, but birds don't worry about where they're going to eat next, nor should we.
Yeah.
Everything is provided for free.
I, I really like what Cory said, and
Wow.
it really comes down. I mean, you're an intelligent guy and articulate and all that, but you know what? Basically, you're saying it comes down to let's get back to basics, right?
Yep.
Let's hear what nature's whispering to us. Let's push away all the matrix and all the influences.
Hmm.
And you both talking about abolitionists and you're talking about slaves, and then there's modern slavery. People think about modern slavery. Oh, there's really slaves in the world. Well, you know what? Every one of us, from the day we got our parents signed that birth certificate, we became a modern day slave. And so I talk about this a lot. How do we get back to being in service to others, right? Corey, I want to hear from you. I don't want to hear too much from me. But the fact is, when we go to our office or our desk, we see stacks of papers. I mean, these are just papers, but we have stacks of papers and bills that come every day, distractions to keep us in the matrix and keep us moving through the system and keep us from doing service to others. And a guy like you, I really admire because you're out there doing what needs to be done. You're being in service to others and you're helping others to open their consciousness and their awareness to what needs to be done. It's really simple, isn't it? Right? So what's the process you would take somebody through, Cory?
Yes, and to touch on that idea of simplicity, how ironic it is that it could be one of the hardest things to do, right? Carl Jung even said that one of the hardest things to do is to simply just sit silently with yourself, to simply, breathe. Like people say, "Oh, I can't meditate." It's right. So, and you might know that as a Qigong practitioner, some of the simplest movements. I mean, what's keeping people from doing that? I notice jolts. I do Qigong as well. I notice people, they're in their mind a lot. They're judging themselves. Oh, am I doing this correctly? And it prevents them from doing it. So it's a fascinating idea, but when you get back down to the roots, as we say, you actually might find quite a bit of complexity, right? I mean, you look at a simple tree in nature. Oh, it's simple. We should just pass it off. But you start going deeper. It's a beautiful, complex system. Same thing with our body and our world, and we ought to perhaps have some humility. In Taoism, there's the three treasures: compassion, humility, and frugality. And I think that ties into what you guys are saying. But yeah, so you want me to run you through a process, right? Let me get this clear before I share of how you would say transition an individual, right? Because I would look at an individual level.
Yeah, more specifically, what your kind of life mission is in all the things that you do. It's not just one, but I think there's a synergy in what you do. And so
Sure.
if you could just kind of give us an overview of that and what that is, what the process is.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I were to put a label on it, I would say it's eco-psychology. I mean, I've looked at many different fields. And it seems like that one resonates the most with my work. And again, not intentionally. It's just how the path has been led for me. And talking to a lot of people and doing all the events I've done, meeting people from all different walks of life, I realize I have to have that individual approach and I have to ask questions and really be present and listen to people because I don't know, again, their past and where they are at. And if people have a reaction to this, right? I mean, I might have some college kids who go on my channel and they're like, "Oh, look, he's anti-vax or he's this or that," and they don't watch me. It's not on me. I'm not here saying that am positioned here or there. I'm saying, I want transparency. openness. And I'm saying that these things that we have in our world, they deserve to be questioned. And I look at the value of every individual, right? So people are going to try to group me, they're going to try to group themselves, they're going to jump to a bunch of assumptions. That's normal. People are going to try to change the topic when you're trying to talk to them about these different things. That's normal. That should be expected. Right? Larkin Rose has a whole course about this, by the way, called Candles in the Dark, on how to talk to people who are totally new to information that you have to share with them. And he basically, it's a Socratic method where you run through a bunch of different questions. Um, and there's certain questions that I share in every video of mine just to get people thinking. But it does depend on the format because, like, for instance, right now, anybody listening to this, they can reflect on it for themselves, but I'm not talking directly to them. In the case where I'm in real life, I wouldn't necessarily film that interaction, but I would, I'd be talking to them and it'd be more personable. So both have their benefits because it might help to watch a video and reflect on it. But if you're not a visual or like you don't watch videos, it might help to read a book, which is why I write books. And it might help to go to an event and join other people and see them doing it in action, like you guys say, showing by example. That can help. It may bring in things that they're currently interested in, right? Like in nutrition, it's like, oh, well, I want to eat healthier. Well, what foods do you currently like? Well, similarly, when it comes to truth, what do you care about in this world? Do you care about your children? Do you care about your future? You care about certain topics and issues in society? Well, let's talk about that. What would you do, about this problem? Guarantee you, the average person on the street probably knows what they should do, like what the country should do, probably better than the average politician, by the way. Um, but either way, let's say I don't agree with that position. Would you want violence done to me if I disagree with you and I don't go along with what you want? And the average person say, "Oh, no, I don't want violence done unto you. I don't want to hurt you because violence is wrong." Right? So at what point then, should we impose it on everyone and say this is law? Or should we simply educate people if it's such a good idea? Right? So it's simply recognizing, where do we draw the line here? Where do we make people slaves? Where do we say people don't own themselves? Because that's the big problem we're addressing. And that's why, for me, I call myself an abolitionist. I mean, my role is to end slavery. And you're right, it still continues. And the abolitionists of the past even said that. It is a mental moral process where you have to say, am I actually creating my own slavery and I don't see it? So when you say to someone that they might be promoting violence and not even recognize that they are through law and government, that's a pretty stark realization. When they realize that they're simply continuing history of the past that was brutish and simply changing the words and making it into euphemisms, like king and queen is now just president and minister, starts to open up some eyes because the same actions are being committed. People are being imposed upon against their will. Authority figures are being created in man, which is not naturally there in nature. Everybody is equal in nature, or at least unequal in nature, and therefore does not one person does not make them qualified to rule over another. Like
Okay.
what gives them that right? I would ask that as a question. I would say, well, what does, right? And you say, oh, well, maybe through this fancy ritual, this fancy process. It's arbitrary. Who decides? And if we're going to live in that arbitrary world of we can just do whatever we want because we think it's best or because everybody agrees, well, then we're not acting on principle or what is right, right? And we're not saying that there can be a morality or that we can recognize that violence is wrong. Like, don't we have to have some sort of basis? Why would we say slavery is wrong? Why would we get rid of it? Just because it feels better? Because it works better? No. The most of the people were arguing saying slavery, we need to keep it because if without it, the economy would not work. Many people arguing for slavery in the 1800s were saying, well, we need slavery because it's like it's impossible to conceive of a reality without it, right?
Yeah.
But yet it's so hard when they're confronted with the facts that every human being can totally be free, that
Yeah.
they can try to make all the justifications they want in their own head. It won't matter.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And I'm going to present this to Ed and you real quick. Ed,
Mhm.
you're talking about kind of common law, like absolutism in a way. But that's fine if I'm living out in the mountains in North Carolina and I have to, come across somebody once in a while. But in a society, we still need some kind of organized laws to some degree. And that's where the mesh between natural law and common law occurs. And so I
Mhm.
want to present this both you and Ed.
Sure.
where do we come to an agreement there between the natural and the common law? Because common law says, do no harm. And if you do, admit it, stand up for it, and make restitution for it. So there has to be something within society. Are you adverse to common law? And Ed, how do you feel about the way the two mesh?
Who do you want to go first? I mean, frankly,
You're our
Ed, if you
guest.
want to go, since I last talked, go ahead. But I'm not opposed to what you just said. I understand, and I want people to be protected, and I want laws, but you can have laws without government. You can have laws without creating authority in man. You can have voluntary interaction in organization without involuntary hierarchies of control that impose upon the individual and destroys their individual rights.
Ed, you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that we have to begin with recognizing a concept which is totally opposed to what is being attempted by the deep state. They want centralization, and we don't. We want decentralization.
Mhm.
And most importantly, you look at Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Jacksonville, etc. Those are obsolete concepts. I mean, I live in a condo and I love the convenience of it, but I can't grow anything other than growing some stuff on my porch. I would love to grow some stuff in the yard that I know that I put some effort into, and it's healing to do that. So the premise is that we need to, in my opinion, transform our environment that is going to be more connected to nature and is going to be more supportive of what we need. Number one. Number two, it's always been a minority of people that have assembled and generated visions and strategic objectives that need to be implemented for the betterment of the community. For example, a bridge, an airport, a port, fix a highway, tear down all the oak trees and put some palm trees and fruit trees. Um, it just boggles the mind. But the bottom line is, as we're finding out with Doge, these people, there's so many layers to what we're finding out. These people are devious, thieves, murderers, no conscience whatsoever. And we're talking about an environment where we're at a higher frequency, respectful of one another, altruistically working together, doing no harm. And if it's done, to fix it immediately, right?
And you can't expect everyone. Just putting that out there. I'm not
Yeah.
expecting everyone either.
Now,
Part of
the
this
other thing
transition,
is,
I'm not expecting everyone to agree.
well, the other thing is, there are a lot of people going to say, you know what? I'm going to live off grid and I don't want to be a part of this.
Right.
I am very, very happy to be out there on my own. Don't bother me. If I need anything, I'll give you a call. If I need, what you have. And that's bottom line. But if you're going to live in community, you have to be respectful of one another
Mhm.
and you have to support one another, much as we've seen after that HARP generated disaster in West Florida and also in the Carolinas and Tennessee and so on. It's the people that came together
Yep.
that helped each other, not the government, because they're a bunch of thieves. They went unchecked and unaudited for too long. And that's one of the things that the grand jury is responsible for, and which is to audit the functions of government as it is structured. And it hasn't been done for over a century. And to
Never
audit
will.
the government whenever they deem it necessary, and there doesn't have to be any indications of wrongdoing. It's to keep everybody on their toes. As we've seen right now, for example, USAID and other departments, they're reducing government by 95%. Whoa, we were saying 90% a while ago, right? And they're doing exactly what we had intuitively kind of figured out.
But
So,
the next level is what uh, we're talking about, which is, we really need to get rid of it all and get
As
back
long as
to
yeah.
people
well,
regulating.
well, look, there are some fundamental things that need to be provided. The question is, what are they and who decides? So, and then how is it going to be financed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taxes are illegal. The Constitution says no taxes. So we have to issue bonds prior to the Federal Reserve. Anytime the federal government wanted to do something, they had to put out a pitch for, hey, buy our bonds so we can go and kill your neighbors across the ocean. Well, it worked to a degree. Then the Federal Reserve came in, et cetera, and that changed everything. They didn't need to have to go to the people.
All right,
So
I'm gonna give Cory a minute here, Ed, if that's
yeah, go
okay.
ahead.
So, Cory, I
Yeah,
asked about merging common law and
yes,
natural law, if you want to speak about that. And then I
sure.
also want to know about your books and how we can help you and all that kind of stuff.
I think the points you guys made are awesome, and I totally agree with all of it. And it is a matter sometimes of just wordplay, right, on what we're talking about. But I think we all generally want the same thing. What I'm saying is that I want everything to be voluntary, okay, in this world.
Yeah,
I don't want people being coerced against their will. Right. So that's why this term voluntarism exists and why I say it's partly one of like the future philosophies. The abolitionists were some of the first voluntarists in history. If not, you go back far and you find ancient China, actually, the Taoists. So if you're a Qigong practitioner, I think that is awesome because I love that tradition. And it really is all about understanding that we're all just people, that nobody has more special rights or lower rights than anybody else. It's really, really simple. And because of how simple it is, it gets overlooked and it's a superstition that we believe certain people have authority in them that other people don't have. Now, it's different. If you're following somebody as a leader, you say, yeah, I want to get this done. People do that all the time. It's the business world, it's the free market, it's how nearly everything in society gets done. The only exception that we give is in politics, where certain people can take our money against our will. You call it taxes. And that's why it's immoral, by the way, not because a paper said so, but because it actually is immoral in reality, right? Because if a law went against your conscience, would you follow the law or would you follow your conscience? This idea of order following or statism is the direct opposite of voluntarism, and that is the belief system that we address in Health Revealed. Because this is the root to all government and all tyranny. You don't have the state unless you have statism. This is a belief system that has been identified over the years. It is not commonly known, unfortunately, in the freedom community. My goal is to make it more known. But it is that belief in authority precisely. And that is actually the problem. Not necessarily what the authority does at all, but the belief in it itself. Because if you have a mass of people who believe they should be enslaved, no matter who you change the slave master, no matter what plantation you put them on, they're going to enslave themselves. And so you can say, oh, well, Trump will free us from everything. He's going to pass all these laws. He's going to change the whole system. Okay, temporary fix. People are still in their own minds mentally enslaved. And so long as that is the case, they will never truly be free. It will just go back to the previous condition. In fact, even get worse because people are deceived into thinking they are free. So they go
right.
back into a slumber and they say, oh, it's okay to not pay attention to what's
Yeah,
going on. So there's a lot of these slippery slopes that we have to pay attention to. If you don't mind, I want to read a quote that I have in my Slavery Gone for Good book. From Oscar Wilde. If you're not familiar with him, he's kind of like a modern day Shakespeare from the 1800s. So this is from my book Slavery Gone for Good, where I talk about the history of the abolitionists that no historian, frankly, has gone over. I had to go to the back of libraries to get this material because it's kept away from the public. You know, who
yeah.
would have thought?
No, yeah. Go
So
figure.
yeah, right. So let's see here. So notice this, okay? Notice the way he says this, and It's very fascinating. He says, as a wise man once said many centuries before Christ, there is such a thing as leaving mankind alone. There is no such thing as governing mankind. All modes of government are failures. Despotism is unjust to everybody, including the despot who was probably made for better things. Oligarchies are unjust to the many, and all allocracies are unjust to the few. High hopes were once formed of democracy, but democracy means simply the bludgeoning of the people by the people for the people. The form of government that is most suitable to the artist is no government at all. And he's referring, by the way, to this guy that lived before Christ, the Chuangzi. If you've ever read that ancient Taoist text, it's one of the main ones. And by the way, while he went to jail, and this was a big controversy back then, and you had newspapers defending him because he was somebody who was challenging all the systems that be in the 1800s. But he wrote amazing plays and everything. Like I said, he was like a modern day Shakespeare. But I want to expand on these points because, of course, from the outright, they seem rather confrontational. So I'm going to go to 305 here in my book, where I talk about some of this as well. And by the way, Lysander Spooner, if there's one person in history that I would say like people should learn about, it's Lysander Spooner.
Yeah,
His
yeah.
works are incredible. Yeah, if you're not familiar. And he talks about common law too. He was a lawyer who really broke down a lot of the systems and the nature of it. So I have a
Yeah,
lot of quotes
his
from him.
book is an essay on the trial by jury.
Yeah, yeah, incredible stuff. Written so well too for the time, because you read all these other quotes, you're like hard to understand, right? It's like only 200 years ago, but the English is like not the same. Like even me just reading it, I'm like, what's going on? Larkin Rose, he made a movie called The Jones Plantation. If you haven't watched it, definitely check it out. It is a great truth movie that goes into this mindset I'm talking about, and there's not really any movies out there that go into that mindset. So it's called The Jones Plantation, where it actually takes like the slave from the plantation in the 1800s and brings us into where we are now, how slavery got more deceptive. Anyways, here's a quote from him in his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, which I would recommend for every practitioner out there too, by the way. He says the notion of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, while it makes nice, feel-good political rhetoric, it is a logical impossibility. A ruling class cannot serve or represent those it rules any more than a slave owner can serve or represent his slaves. The only way he could do so is by ceasing to be a slave owner, by freeing his slaves. Likewise, the only way a ruling class could become a servant to the people is by ceasing to be a ruling class, by relinquishing all of its power. Government cannot serve the people unless it ceases to be government. Right? And again, just even if some people might be opposed to some of this, I want just hear out the perspective, right? Because this perspective I wasn't certainly did not get exposed to, and I was a very pro right winger, Republican, constitutionalist, Trump. And my dad worked for him. I had the water bottle, I had the shirt, I had everything, and I was holding up the door at the polls. I went to every single speech. I even went in person. I was I was doing the whole spiel. I knew everything about the guy, right? And I still respect him because the thing is, I see him as a human being who's just playing the game. A lot of people are playing the game. I'm helping people see it's a game. And I'm helping the people that he claims to serve. That is my focus, the mass public. One person, whether it's Hitler, Mao, Stalin, can give the order. The millions who follow, they are the ones that are truly responsible for the actions that they themselves commit, regardless of who tells them what to do. They make that choice for themselves. And if they say they're not responsible, oh, I was just doing what I was told, that's not an excuse to give away your own self-ownership. But this is precisely what every person who believes in government does, actually. Here's Hector Morel. He says, scan the history of the whole entire world among the ancient peoples as among the moderns, and no matter the form of government, the nation always presents to you this terrible and ominous taboo. Uh, Tyrants and subjects, masters and slaves, exploiters and exploited, which is to say, authority, rights, and privileges on one side, on the other, servitude, duties, and charges. And by the way, there's no coincidence that this idea of subjugation or subject and some of the terms we use are just merely changing throughout history. Consult the social contracts, past and present constitutions, whatever their spirit and origin, monarchist or republican, liberal or democratic, that have been voted in by the representatives or granted by the despots. They can all be summarized thus: Art 1, the people must obey, suffer, and labor. Art 2, the possessor must command, enjoy, and do nothing. And oftentimes the government is not helping us, right? Well, Against why? I mean, it's not operating like a business. People
More than
equate it
often.
to a to a church. They equate it to a school or an organization. No, this is creating an authority in man and saying, "Oh my gosh, you're going to save us from our problems," and using violence for all the decrees and actions it commits. And if it's not backed by violence, it's not a law. It's just a recommendation. It's a rule. It's a guideline. So what is the government really? It's just a bunch of people. Where's their authority coming from? We put on a crown, we put on a certain uniform. Now all of a sudden they are the president. What does the president do? What's the actual function? Everything the government takes has been taken from somebody else. It doesn't produce any product in society. It only transfers what products already exist. So, if there was actually producing security, then it'd be another thing. But we can hire private security. We can defend ourselves with the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms, which is given to us by God, frankly. So if that's the case, what then is the purpose of these systems? We can come together, we can organize, we can make security firms, we can get security cameras. There's a bunch of security solutions that are voluntary that work way better and are work in seconds as opposed to some cops that are minutes away, funded and centralized um, by people who, again, their money's being taken by them by force. So, I can go on here, but I'll read just one more from Jeremy Locke. His book, The End of All Evil, is fantastic. He says, democracy is about making slaves and masters of slaves. The teachings of the world's greatest democracies are those of liberty and a voice for every person. They teach us that democracies are the greatest possible form of government. The reason they give us this is that democracy offers a voice for the common man. Unlike kings, dictators, and communists, democracy allows most people to have say in the affairs of their neighbors. The evil of democracy knows no freedom. A person has none to enslave him. Instead, democracies offer everyone the opportunity to enslave you. The democratic culture teaches the rule of law. It teaches that law created by majority rule is morality. Any law, any demand, any punishment is moral when implemented by the majority. Perversions of democracy, such as democratic republics and supermajorities, are no different. Any law able to be passed by representative, majority, supermajority, or any other group becomes morality. If you can convince 50% of a people to enslave themselves or their neighbors, is it moral? If you can convince 66%, 75%, 99%, or everyone, is it morality? All other forms of tyranny are obviously evil because they allowed a few to control the lives of all. So there's this deceptiveness in democracy and republics that actually makes it more dangerous than even some of the very outright, like, oh, I know this person rules me, or communism and socialism and all the big, tyrannical governments in history.
Yeah,
So something to think about.
you asked a question, and it was like, who gives the government the authority? And that is that we do. The problem is that we have stepped away from our civic duties. We have let the monster run wild and let it out of the cage. And so, there's your answer. We, the people, are responsible for controlling the government power that we gave them to serve us. They don't rule us; we rule them. But we left our civic duties way back, 1800s, and you know the story. I don't have to go through it. So, Ed, any last comments?
Yeah, I think,
all that. Thank you, Cory. There's awesome stuff, and we could spend
so
hours discussing it. So,
several things. One is the Second Amendment. I don't know what the guys up in Tallahassee don't understand. The Constitution is pretty clear. And then at the end of 2024, we had the Chevron deference Supreme Court decision that said that departments were not allowed to interpret anything. All laws had to come from the legislature. So Tallahassee right now has a bill that's being presented to allow open carry. And it's being promoted by Gun Owners of America, which I support entirely. And frankly, I don't know why the sheriffs, these idiots, don't understand that they're really in contravention of their constitutional duty, their oath of office, and they are committing treason. So that's number one. Chevron deference, very important decision that mandates and other stuff that comes down from government, null and void, number one. Number two, Thoreau was put in jail way back when because of the Indian Wars. And they went to
Garrison as
visit.
well. All
What's
the
that?
transcendentalists were put in jail, not just him. He was the one who wrote about it. But all
Yeah,
of them, they actually willfully not paid taxes. They
yeah.
didn't want to pay them because they knew it would go to war. And by the way, Gandhi and similar figures throughout history who I have documentaries on have done similar things. Very powerful.
But it was very interesting. He was asked, well, why are you letting yourself be in prison? And his response was pretty enlightening. He said, well, why are you not in jail? Why are you supporting what's going on by not being here?
Yeah,
And then the other thing is where I disagree to some degree with regard to leadership. I'm a licensed general aviation pilot. Well, I'm not going to let anybody sit in the cockpit and fly
right.
the airplane. You need to have the skills and talent
Yes,
to fly that plane. Same thing with a
exactly.
boat captain, right? Now, when that flight is done, that's a different story. But bottom line, there's a little bit of chopping and changing that needs to take place based upon the skill levels of the individual. And I'll leave you with a movie, a
100%.
French, a French movie. It's called La Belle Verte. In English, it's translated to the Green Planet. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Oh, it's
It's
Mm.
pretty
great.
cool. Have you?
Oh yeah, I have.
So La Belle Verte is all about a number of souls that were on some other dimension. And God says, I need a volunteer to go to Earth.
And nobody
Nobody,
wants to go.
nobody raised their hand. They say, those people are crazy.
It's great.
Finally, somebody decided to volunteer and came down to Earth. And it's all of the impressions of somebody that was so evolved at a different dimensional level coming down into the third dimension. And it's hilarious. It's a comedy, very well done. It's worth
Hmm.
spending an hour and a half watching that movie.
So,
Interesting.
Corey, this has been incredibly thought-provoking. I've really enjoyed this time
Yeah,
together. I could go on for hours and hours. Sometimes we have
yeah,
Gene Decode on, and we don't stop. But our audience has limited, bandwidth and time. So we'd
hmm
love to have you back, and we can, focus on certain issues and really isolate it down. Would you
sure.
tell us, how can we get in touch with you? What can people, what is a good contact for you? How can people help you, or how can you help them?
Yeah. And like I said, if this idea of like authority or statism is new for anybody, as it was for me, and you feel maybe alarmed, I understand. When I was new to this knowledge, I was just, I couldn't wrap my head around it. I'm like, what do you mean, like authority? Like, there's always authority. Like, there's always going to be that. I'm specifically saying the moral right to do wrong, the moral exception that we create in certain human beings. And I agree with Edward 100%. Again, with everything you said, it's like value and skill. That has nothing to do with the title and the identity you give yourself, right? How many kids graduate out of college? They still don't know how to do basic things just because they graduate, they have a diploma, they find out their diploma is useless. It doesn't
Right.
And
mean a
how many
thing. What
kids
matters is
and
their
how many
actual
kids drop out
skill.
and how many kids drop out of high school and find their path immediately and are very successful and
Yeah.
happy,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
again, it's not to say that it's worthless, that all cases of diploma is worth. It's the point is that the knowledge and the skill is what matters and not the identity. But people get the two mixed up, and then, now somebody's only looking for the identity. It's like, well, now what about all the people over here who might be really skillful? You might be passing up a great opportunity. So, it's and by the way, I'm going to have to be creating a lot of business models myself here on the land. I'm organizing people all the time and also for my newspaper. So there's a lot of things that goes on, but it's all voluntary. And it's like at no point do I say, "Oh my gosh, you have to obey me because I say so." It's like this is a thing that has been kept up for thousands of years. We're just feeling up like we're a part of it because it's been there before us. So we just have to come together with our fellow men and say, what are we talking about? We're all just people. This is
Yeah.
nonsense. Let's rule ourselves. This is self-government. This is common law. This is natural law. We can set up courts. We can do all the things that we want
I'm
to
ready
do.
to go. Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's
Not
use
me.
common law because it's based on natural law as long as it's voluntary. It's all the same. And whether people call it agorism, there's a bunch of terms for it. Um, Philosophical anarchism, like the type Tolkien talked about, the type Carl Jung or Abraham Maslow, a psychologist, talked about, very different from these people who are protesting on the street. So it's like when you start diving into this perspective, you're like, huh, it's a whole different way of looking at the world. And it's not saying it's a theory, it's a reality. Like we all just are people. And so it starts to shift things quite a bit. And I encourage people to check out my book on Taoism because I actually have ancient texts from ancient China that are not shared among modern scholars. And so if people want resources, this book here, and I could give it to you for free, Edward, if I wouldn't mind giving to you as a practitioner. I respect that
Thank you.
a lot. And then my slavery book. I mean, these two are very good for, especially this one for beginner readers, anybody new to Eastern spirituality. Uh,
Mhm.
the Tao Te Ching is the second most translated work in the world after the Christian Bible.
Yep, yep.
So incredible stuff. Some of the very, very individual, freedom-oriented people in ancient China, and it's like, wow, amazing to see that in such a part of the world, which now, we would consider the most tyrannical. So what happened there? Confucianism and a bunch of other ideologies. Wow, look at
I'll
that.
send you in return a book written by my Qigong master, Unlocking Your Happiness Within. It's got a workbook with it. So if you get me your
Beautiful.
information, I'll send it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so theliberator.us for everybody out there, theliberator.us. And we have other websites like healthreveal.org and nita.one for permaculture, Nita.one. That stuff is more so about growing food. So healthreveal.org for the psychology aspect, theliberator.us for the abolitionist aspect. And if you're interested in any one of these things, anybody can reach out to me and I can kind of guide you in the right direction.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Send me all the links and we'll provide them. And we'll, like I said, we're happy to have you back on. If anyone wants to contact Cory, just go to WTPNlive.com or WTPN live@gmail.com, and you can
You guys are
email
great.
us, and we'll forward that over to him if you don't get through to his information, which we'll get to you. So I really appreciate it, Cory. You're awesome. Keep up the good work. I love what's going on with the colleges, the young people. We all have a heart for that. That's our
Trying.
future. And I think we're all on the same page and we're all moving in the right consciousness together. So it was
Yeah,
a
man.
pleasure.
Thank
Ed,
you.
thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Nice meeting you, Cory. Thanks for the dialogue. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I love it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, guys, have a great night. Take care.
Take care.